Hi everyone, I am honored to introduce our guest speaker for the Banking and Finance session at the Human Advantage Conference. Now, Caroline Ahmed, who is a director at BVA BDRC and one of the BVA Group's champion for banking and finance, and myself will be speaking with Jeff Kreisler. Jeff is head of behavioral science for JP Morgan Private Bank and founding editor of peoplescience.com, which is a thought leadership platform for applied behavioral science. Jeff is a two-time best-selling, internationally published author. He is the author of a book that I have loved, Dollar and Cents, about the psychology of money, published, I think, in 22 countries, with my friend, but less than yours, I'm sure, and mentor Dan Ariely. Your work in the field has been praised by the likes of the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, Business Insider, Audible, CNN, and the Washington Post. So, welcome, Jeff. We are very proud to have you on board at the Human Advantage Conference. A big thank you for being with us. We are more than excited to have this conversation with you.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Just to echo everything that Eric has said there, Jeff, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you today, and thank you so much for talking to you. If I may, I'm going to start right at the top. You are one of the most preeminent experts in the psychology of money. I would love to get your take on why you think this field is so important.
Thanks for the compliment, and I'm working on taking compliments, even though inside my imposter syndrome is telling you otherwise. I think the field is important for a lot of reasons. One is I think that money is measurable, so the opportunity to actually measure the impact of any interventions we have makes it so it's a ripe area. But more than that, I think that money plays such a preeminent and prominent role in all of our lives, and yet we don't really think about how we think about it. People talk about money all the time, but it's what have you bought, what have you spent on? It's what can you see? And so much of money is about stuff that you can't see. You can't see savings, you can't see planning, you can't see investments, and there's a disconnect between how prominent money is in our culture and how we all actually feel and think about it. You may live on a block and everyone has a house that costs the same amount, but you don't know if a neighbor is, $1 million in debt or $2 million up. And we talk about it, but we don't talk about what's really going on. And it's something that we're not very comfortable saying. We're not comfortable admitting we don't know what to do with our money. There was a great survey. I'm not forgetting who put it out, and I'll remember later. But it basically said that particularly American men, but I think it's true all over, American men were more willing to admit whether or not they used Viagra than to admit how much they save for retirement. Right? They're more willing to talk about this teeny tiny little savings account, right? and it just reflects like how hard it is for us to grapple with these emotions and have these conversations. So my hope, my delusion, is that some of the work that the people in this field are doing, my peers are doing, my superiors are doing, will just help people talk about money and share what they've learned and share the insight that they've seen. And understanding the psychology and how we think and feel about it is key to that, to helping people make better decisions.
And that Viagra example is so powerful. It's so true and really helps to illuminate something that I think we all know is going on. But as you say, we don't talk about it. You mentioned decisions for a moment there. Could you summarize some of the key insights you've learned while studying how we make decisions with our money? And in particular, what are we not so good at?
That's a great question. And can I just read my book? I think that the number one thing that I've noticed is that money is emotional. And it's something that it takes a few steps for most people to acknowledge. People think money is about numbers and charts and data, and that it's not emotional, that that's cold, that it's simple, and part of that is that's part of the challenge, is that ultimately money is emotional for a few reasons. One is because there's a lot of uncertainty. right? There's uncertainty in if you decide to do something with your money now, how will that impact things in the long run? Whether it's an investment and how will the market do, whether that's a purchase of a couch and will my couch last for more than a year, or a car. There's always uncertainty, and then uncertainty makes us feel uncomfortable, and there's emotion in that. But I think probably more important and deeper is that financial decisions are about personal emotion and goals and values and what we want and what do we want for ourselves. Now, it may be as simple like I'd like a cup of coffee. That's not a hard one. But it's also like, what do I want in a few years if this is savings? Do I want this fancy car? Do I want this big house? Do I want this education? And it's really hard for us to grapple with that. And when we have these emotions, whether they're the hard personal goals and values and what we want, or it's the uncertainty, what we tend to do is we have this uncomfortable feeling and we make the decision that feels good, right? We make the decision that feels good based upon heuristics, is our term of art, or biases, or these traps, as opposed to the one that might rationally be the right choice for us, because it's easier to do that than it is to do the deep thinking and the hard thinking about it. And that's human nature, and that's okay. And what I have found works in practice is to let people know that it's okay to make money mistakes, to not know what you're doing. That's totally normal that we want to do the easy thing. But what we should start to do and strive to do is identify our particular human nature, so then we can create systems and frameworks and products and services so that we use our human nature for our benefit instead of having it be used against us. Right? If we know that we fall for sale prices, find a way to check ourselves and at least just take a moment to pause and think about it. If we spend too much on our monthly discretionary spending, there's ways we can do. You can set aside some money automatically so you have less on your phone that you say. There. I don't want to get too deep into all the examples, but just the different systems that we can set up for ourselves personally, or with a professional advisor, or just on our website of our bank. It's not a matter of trying to change ourselves. Like, you can't suddenly become that person with self-control, right? Whether it's money or exercise. I'm not going to suddenly be the person that wakes up every day to work out, right? But if I put, my sneakers and my gym shorts next to my bed, maybe I'll remember that I made a promise to work out. Maybe I'll make it a little bit easier. And so maybe one more time a week I'll work out. And the same with financial decisions, right? We're not going to suddenly be the person that spends perfectly and makes every right decision. But if we put in a little nudges, little reminders, we can do a little bit better. And that should be the goal. As to sort of I think your question was sort of the most common things that I think we fall for. I think that sale prices sort of touches on this idea of relativity, that we fall for making the easy choice when it comes to like a sale, right? You're more likely to buy a sweater that was $100 marked down to $60 than just a $60 sweater. Because that's easy to say. I know that a $60 is better than $100, and so forth. That's the right choice. Then is $60 worth this sweater? And we fall for this relativity all the time when we look at comparative values, right? Percentages are a great example. I love in talks, I'll often ask the crowd, if you went to a business supply store, office supply store, and you're going to buy some printer paper, and it was $10, and the cashier said, you can go next door and get it for $5, would you go? And most people say yes, of course. I say, great. What if the next day you went to buy a mattress and it was $1,000 and the cashier said, next door it's $995, would you go? Most people say no. I say, great. That's relativity. I asked the same question, would you go next door for $5? But in our minds, we're like, oh, this is twice as much versus this is 1% or barely even a percent change. And it's an easy way for us to think about a decision. We fall for these relative values all the time. The other thing related to that I think is particularly powerful in our increasingly financial technology, fintech world, is the pain of paying. The pain of paying, the idea that when we pay for something, it stimulates the same region of our brain as physical pain, and that sort of evolutionary sense makes us stop and pay attention to something. Right, and think, oh, is this the right thing to do? Right, you put your hand on a stove, that pain makes you look at it and go, oh, I should stop that. Right? So financially, when there's a pain of paying, when we spend with cash, it makes us more conscious of our decision. But now there's so much financial technology, Apple Pay and automatic bill pay and scanning devices, and these like Amazon stores where you just walk in and it scans your phone and you don't even know what you're paying. It makes it so that that we pay without pain, which makes spending easier, but that isn't necessarily a good thing, right? If we're just unconsciously spending money. And the pain of paying is the particular example that I find as, I look at it as here's the traps, but also the opportunities, right? Because you can, if you identify this issue that we have as people, the human advantage to it can be, instead of like, I'm going to spend too much, it's like, okay, you know what are my savings goals, right? Like, what are my goals, and can I use this lowering the pain of paying, lowering the friction, lowering the attention for my benefit? And I know that there are apps and other programs, right? Like, I think it's called Acorns, where like you set a savings goal, and every time you buy something, it rounds up and puts a few pennies into that savings goal. And you can set up a lot of like automatic deductions into your retirement savings in America, the 401k. Every paycheck, it just takes out 7% and puts it into a retirement plan. Whereas if I had to think about that every paycheck, I probably wouldn't do it. So while, it's a trap, it's a challenge, it's a thing we fall for, the Apple Pay and overspending, it's also an opportunity to create a system that helps us achieve our goals.
So from everything that you're saying, this whole area of money management and decisions regarding our money is absolutely ripe for interventions. Can you share some examples of interventions grounded in B-Side that have had a particularly strong impact, or that you find particularly interesting?
Sure. So the one that I always, my mind always wanders to is this experiment. I believe it was sort of run by Hal Hirschfeld at UCLA. And I hope if Hal listens to this, he forgives me if I misrepresent. But let me back up and say it was the challenge of present bias. Present bias, as I'm sure many of us know, it's just the idea that the present is just much more emotionally tangible and powerful than the future. And financial decisions often involve us doing something that feels bad right now. Put aside money. Don't spend for the benefit of a future that is weeks, months, years, decades down the road. Sometimes if it's planning for our legacy, it's beyond our lifetime. So it's so hard emotionally to connect and care about that future. Because the studies just show, like, we literally think of our future selves as different people. And present bias, the feeling of right now, I want to buy this car, I want to go on this vacation, I want to eat this ice cream that's not good for my weight loss. That's just so much more powerful, and the scales are just completely unfairly, unevenly balanced. So the challenge becomes, how do we connect to that future so that the hard things today that are going to benefit us, in 20, 30 years, so that scales are tipped a little, so that has some weight in our decision. And one of the things that I love that Hal Hirschfeld did, again from UCLA, and I believe he partnered with Bank of America or Merrill Lynch at the time, was they created this thing where people could interact with a virtual reality version of themselves aged. So it was like they put on a little goggles or helmet, and they just had a conversation with Jeff, but the computer aged me 20 or 30 years. And how they measured it is beyond my memory right now, but basically they found when people were connected with their future selves and they saw them, even just the visualization, they became more connected to that person, and then they made decisions that benefited that future self a little bit more. And while that's not something that's scalable, at least right now, for everybody to do all the time, just the idea of connect in some way to your future self, and it's going to make you make decisions for that future self, I think is so powerful. And it has implications for almost every decision that we do. One stop I had before I got focused on finance was I was helping a startup that was working on type 2 diabetes. And it was these patients, they were diagnosed, and the doctor said, take this medication and have this diet if you want to live. And people weren't doing it. And so one of the things we tried to do was have them, talk about their goals. And I remember one guy in particular was like, I want to walk my daughter down the aisle at her wedding. And I was like, so just connect to that. Visualize that and make the medication and the diet easier. And I think the same obviously can play out in financial decisions. And so many of our decisions are about doing something now that's hard for the benefit of the future. And if we can just find ways to connect to that future, that's what can be powerful. And so, there have been obviously a ton of amazing experiments around financial decision making. That's the one I sort of come to. And I'll be honest, it may be some bias because I have young kids and I want to see my young kids. So when I'm, late at night going to order some pizza, I'm like, pizza or hang around till I'm 80.
I love that example too, but maybe it's because I've also got a young child. I have one more question before I hand back to Eric. We'd mentioned earlier you're head of behavioural science at JP Morgan. To wrap up, keeping that role in mind, why do you think it is specifically relevant to apply behavioural science to the sector?
The work that I do is largely focused in investments and planning, right? I'm not like in the commercial bank and credit card. So I'll say within that investment and planning, financial planning, wealth management, there are a lot of these biases that are so strong that are important. Present bias, as I mentioned, right? Investments are all about planning for the future. Sometimes you're not there. So recognizing the connection that we need to make to that future outcome. Mental accounting, I think, is huge. Mental accounting, the idea that we think and feel and behave differently towards our money depending on the use of that money. I think people, whether they acknowledge it or not, they have whatever their sort of wealth is, and they have a portion of it that's like, this is my safe money. This is the money to make sure that I have a house and my kids have food and clothes, and no matter what happens, we're okay. Then they might have a little portion that's like a speculation money, right? Here's for me to try Bitcoin, or give my brother-in-law more money for another restaurant idea. Like, who knows? Like, it's okay. And there's money to maybe be a philanthropist, or money to save for education, or whatever it may be. And each of these little mental accounts, we feel very differently about. Like, we're not going to take risks with this safe money that we would with that crypto money. And recognizing that even in broad investments, it's not always about maximizing return. It's not just how can I get the most money. So recognizing the different sort of goals within each of these accounts can be really powerful and help us focus and make the best decisions. Like in the crypto, a 2% chance of success, maybe we're willing to accept that. Whereas in the safe money, we want 100% chance of success. And so we would choose things differently. So that's particularly powerful. And I think ultimately the big takeaway, and this applies not just in investing, but I think a lot of financial decisions, is when you're dealing with clients and you're the expert and you're dealing with the client who maybe is not the expert. Sometimes we forget that the client doesn't want to walk away and be an expert. They don't want to leave a meeting going, oh, I'm glad we have a 2% allocation in this. Or if you're in healthcare, I'm glad that my A1C is this number. The client, the patient, the customer wants to walk away from that interaction and turn to their partner and say, I feel good about our choices. I feel good about that. Right? And so I think that if we recognize that is what the client, they want it to be simple, they want it to feel good, and if we can serve them what is good for them in a way that they will feel good about it, that is the real success that anybody in a client-customer relationship can offer their clients. Is finding a way to translate all the expertise that you have, whether it's financial markets or medical or whatever it may be, or diet, and make it in a way that the client understands how it serves their goals and that what they're doing is in their best interest. That's what we can do for them to make it easy and deepen that relationship and hopefully pursue and get better outcomes.
Okay, that's really great. Thanks for the insight. Maybe a final question before we start our roundtable. What is one piece of advice you would give to banking and finance professionals who would like to start applying behavioral science to their work?
So I will tell you the Jeff Kreisler method that recognizes that we can't create behavioral science experts, and I think one of the challenges of our field is we don't want people just to take little insights and just start randomly applying. The gentleman who runs the Commonwealth Bank in Australia, I'm forgetting his name right now, he gave me the expression of babies with bazookas. Right? You don't want people just to hear, oh, I heard about loss aversion, so everything is loss aversion. That's, as we know, that's not how things work. So the stepping back, and the one thing that I suggest to people in almost every field is, before you have an interaction with a client, just take 10 seconds and ask yourself, who is this client? And answer it without any reference to their money or their goal or their specific things that are in your industry, right? Their money or their finances. Who are they? They're a grandparent, they're a cancer survivor, they're a philanthropist, they're someone who cares about the environment. What matters to them as a person outside of that business relationship? And when we do that, that just gets us in a little bit of a framework that gets a little bit out of our mind on what we offer and more about what they need emotionally. Because ultimately, all of these biases, all these fears, all these things that we fall for as that client or that customer are based upon like what we want as a person and these emotions and these things that guide us to easy choices. So if we, as that service provider, if you will, just focus a little bit about who they are, that's going to be a step in that direction. Is that behavioral science practice? Not really, but it's getting us closer to recognizing the emotions and psychology that go into that service, that business relationship.
And maybe I have an advice to add. Read your
Yep.
book, Dollars and Cents.
Yes.
So thanks a lot, Jeff. I think it was really a great and insightful conversation for our audience.